Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brian's Horror Corner, and welcome to this horror movie review for day 22 of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. So today we're going to jump back into the 80s and take a look at an absolute cult classic, kind of a horror comedy, black comedy horror movie, and that, of course, is from 1987, The Monster Squad. So yeah, I have this two disc 20th anniversary edition. So needless to say, this edition was already from about 15 years ago because the movie's about 35 years old now. But it's still a really nice edition. A lot of good special features, interviews, and commentary. So I really like this cover as well. So yeah, the Monster Squad from 1987. Let's just go ahead and get into it. So the Monster Squad is a 1987 American black comedy horror film directed by Fred Decker and written by Decker and Shane Black, who met as classmates at UCLA. Peter Hyams and Rob Cohen served as executive producers. It was released by TriStar Pictures on August 14th, 1987. The film features pastiche of the Universal monsters, led by Count Dracula. They are confronted by a group of savvy kids out to keep them from controlling the world. So right there, that already sounds like a fun premise. Um, the Monster Squad is a club of preteens who idolize classic monster movies and their non-human stars. Club leader Sean Crenshaw, whose younger sister Phoebe desperately wants to join the club, is given the diary of legendary monster hunter Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. But his excitement abates when he finds it's written in German. Sean and the rest of the Monster Squad, his best friend and second in command, Patrick Rhodes, clumsy, overweight Horace, tough older kid Rudy Holler, and little Eugene, go to visit an elderly man known as Scary German Guy, actually a kind of gentleman and a former concentration camp prisoner, to translate the diary. The diary describes in great detail the amulet that is composed of concentrated good. One one day out of every century, as the forces of good and evil reach a balance, the otherwise indestructible amulet becomes vulnerable to destruction. With the next day of balance happening within a few days, at the stroke of midnight, the kids realize they must gain possession of the amulet and use it. With an incantation from Van Helsing's diary to open a wormhole in the universe and cast the monsters into limbo. So yeah, that's the setup and the premise for the Monster Squad. The cast, we have Stephen Mock as Detective Dale Crenshaw, Andre Gower as Sean Crenshaw, Robbie Kiger as Patrick Rhodes, Duncan Rager as Count Dracula, Tom Noonan as Frankenstein's monster, Brett Challam as Horace, Ryan Lambert as Rudy Holler, and Ashley Bank as Phoebe Crenshaw, Michael Faustino as Eugene, and Jonathan Gries as the desperate man, the Wolf Man. So yeah, that's the setup, the premise, and the cast for the Monster Squad from 1987. I love this movie. This is one of the great go-to 80s movies for me, right up there with the Goonies and Stand by Me and Back to the Future and some other ones that aren't necessarily horror related, but just fun 80s movies with all the cheese and atmosphere to go with it. So yeah, the Monster Squad. Let's just go ahead and get into my review, starting with the things that I like about it or the pros. So you got to start with the look and the design of these monsters. I thought it was really effective. And they were also really well casted in terms of the actors who were portraying the monsters, especially Tom Noonan as Frankenstein's monster and Duncan Rager as Dracula. Just their movements and just their overall mannerisms to play the monsters is really believable, really spot on, as opposed to if you just had like stuntmen or something in those roles. I mean, it was important that they casted the right actors, in my opinion, and they did. And that's half the battle right there. That's half of what makes this movie so great is that you believe these monsters as being some version of the Universal monsters. Obviously, they can't exactly be the Universal monsters because TriStar didn't own the rights to the Universal monsters. Universal did. So I thought they did a really good job with Stan Winston with the monster design. So that's the first thing that stands out. Also, the writing of the movie does a really good job of making this premise and story, which I read in the synopsis there and like the premise, really believable and not a complete silly gag, which it definitely could have been if they wouldn't have written it well and they wouldn't have done the right things with this movie. As a viewer, you're definitely invested in this and you believe what's going on and you're behind the Monster Squad in terms of stopping these monsters and saving the world. It's just great storytelling. By Fred Decker and Shane Black. Those two really did a great job writing this story in a believable and compelling kind of way. So that definitely stood out to me. It was very much a pro. Obviously, getting back to Stan Winston, his effects, his makeup effects and practical effects, I think are really good in this movie. Not all of them. Some of them you could tell are old school. They're 80s, especially as it relates to like the wormhole and some of like the electricity and sort of the blue visual effects and stuff when they're trying to bring Frankenstein's monster back to life and stuff. Some of them don't hold up as well, but again, it was made in the 80s. I love the 80s cheese of them, but for the most part, the effects, the makeup effects, the gore effects, the little bit of gore that's in the movie, mostly when the Wolfman blows up. Really great by Stan Winston, and it really adds and brings a lot to the movie to make the story even more effective than it already was written. Um, the human characters as well in this movie are really good, especially the kids in the Monster Squad. Horace, Sean, and Phoebe, especially, those three really stand out to me. They feel like real kids at that age. They don't feel like, actors that are trying to portray kids that age. And as a viewer, you're behind them all the way. I mean, they're just from their jokes to their humor to the more dramatic moments, like when Phoebe has to say goodbye to Frankenstein's monster in the end. It's all done really well, and again, it goes back to wonderful writing in this movie. I just can't praise the writing enough of the premise of this movie. Of course, you got to talk about the music. I just absolutely love the score to this movie. The soundtrack I could listen to over and over on repeat. The musical that they use, musical scores in this movie. It's so 80s. It so well fits with the tone and the atmosphere of this movie and just the movie in general. It's definitely one of the best things about this movie is the soundtrack and the score. Just absolutely love it. Um, and then obviously it is a black comedy, horror comedy movie, and I find the humor to be very effective, which is definitely not always the case in these horror comedy movies, even from the '80s. But this one, they get it right. It's just a very effective humor that's used throughout the movie. It lands really well for me. Of course, it includes some iconic humor lines. Obviously, the most famous being Wolfman's got nards. I mean, that's just classic stuff right there. And it just, there's so many more, but it's just, yeah, the humor really works well and makes this for such a fun watch. So, and then again, I really enjoyed the 80s cheese and atmosphere that this movie has. You can tell if you didn't know anything about this movie when you put it on for the first time, it's clearly a movie that was made in the 80s. Just love it. Also, there's an atmosphere to this movie, 80s aside, that I can't really explain. It's sort of that small town, just sort of cozy, like a warm blanket kind of feel with this community and the cops and all the people that live in this town. Um, they write the characters with a little bit of backstory, like the um, Stephen Mock's character, Detective Del Crenshaw, Sean Crenshaw's dad, and his mom aren't getting along very well, and she's actually ready to leave before shit goes down towards the end of the movie. So it isn't just they don't just throw an ma and pa apple pie kind of family at us. This is a real family that's got issues aside from the monsters obviously invading the world. So yeah, it's just got great feel good atmosphere to the movie just up front. So yeah, I just can't praise this movie enough. Those are my pros for the Monster Squad. Just absolutely love it. As far as a con goes, I don't know how much of a con it is. I think it's more of an explanation of why this movie didn't do as well when it was first released. But it is something that does stand out to me more from a mixed or I don't want to even say negative because I don't feel like it's a huge negative. But the movie kind of pigeonholes itself in a little bit in terms of the wide audience appeal that it didn't have, especially at the time that it came out. And what I mean by that is it's kind of a movie that fits for a specific like 4 or 5 year age, like 10 to 14, I would say, because the movie has a tone and such that it's a little bit too kiddish for like 15, 16 year old and older. But it's also specifically because of the language. It's also a movie that really you can't really show a 6, 7, 8 year old either. You kind of have to wait until they at least understand what some of these things mean. I have a 6 year old son, and me and my wife, we love this movie. She loves it. She actually introduced it to me before I even saw it, actually, about 10 or 15 years ago. We have a 6 year old son. We were going back and forth whether, because he loves the Universal monsters, you know. Um, but we're glad we haven't let them watch it yet because it's just they really do they don't drop f bombs in the movie, but it's basically like one step below that, and we just don't want to introduce him to that stuff for at least 3 or 4 years, which I'm sure he'll be introduced to it through school and the school bus and all that kind of stuff. But so yeah, the movie just kind of has it really made it really kind of I don't want to say tripped over itself, but it just I think part of the reason that it didn't do as well when it came out in '87 from a box office standpoint is because of the fact that just the kind of tone that it goes for. And I never really feel like the tone of the movie just never quite seems to know what it wants to be entirely. Like, on one hand, it's just a fun family kind of movie, but then they throw in language like there's some shit bombs dropped and there's some asshole, and they even, at one point one of the monsters call a 5 year old girl a bitch, and it's really weird. It fits for like 11 to 13 year olds. It really does. That's like the best age gap there. But again, that's only like 3 years of people. Now, obviously, once you become an adult and you grew up with this movie, part of the reason it has the cult following now is because of the young people at the time that grew up with it. Obviously, they have a lot of nostalgia for it. That and the fact that it's an '80s movie. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, like a lot of other people do. But at the time, I think the first 10 or 15 years, it did kind of pigeonhole itself with sort of the tone of the movie, not quite sure if it wanted to be more of a mature movie. It wanted to be more of a family friendly movie. So it's kind of stuck in that weird no man's land. So, again, I don't know how much of a con or a negative it is. It's just something to point out that I don't think the movie really hit on as well as it could have at the time. But that being said, this is a fantastic movie that it also works really well as this time of the year kind of Halloween movie, even though it's not set on Halloween. It came out in August. Because it's got those quote unquote universal monster type characters, it really fits well in the Halloween season, I think. So it's a great watch. Me and my wife watch this movie every single October at some point. So I definitely recommend it. I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. It's just a fantastic more of a horror comedy, black comedy kind of a movie with horror elements, namely the Universal monster ripoffs, basically in it. But it's very well done. It's very well written with iconic lines and characters, and great effects, especially the monsters design. So 9 out of 10. Definitely go and buy the Monster Squad. Don't just watch it. Go and buy it. I'm sure they have a lot newer versions than this one. I might get it on Blu-ray, but I really do like this version, so I'm not going to part with it anytime soon. So that's my review for the Monster Squad. Go ahead and comment down below if you guys have seen the Monster Squad, your thoughts on it. If you kind of agree with me on the whole age aspect thing, I'd be curious to hear. Please like this video and hit the little notification bell down below so you don't miss any of my upcoming reviews for this series. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any of my great horror content beyond this series and into next year. So, thank you for watching this review for day 22 of my 31 Days of Halloween Horror series. Hope everybody's having a good October and stay scared. Bye.